I wanted to know what's hard about working from home during this crisis. And you can just, put some thoughts in here. Managing your kids while working, that's obviously a big topic of today. Loneliness, fear of missing out or falling behind peers, finding time to work on strategy versus putting out fires all day, managing your schedule versus a partner, providing tech assistance throughout the day to your whole family. Or my favorite one that came from someone who's having so much challenge, she couldn't even take time for the webinar today because she's got a toddler. She said, preventing my toddler from crawling over to the dog food bowl and eating the kibble. And that is one of the biggest challenges. But I see some folks putting in here, mental health, so much other things to do at home, concentrating, balance, focus, pressure of homeschooling. Again, more on maintaining focus, not resenting spouse, interesting, keeping the house clean. Yeah, that's a big challenge in this world. All right, so let's get started. So again, I said a few words about Jason. Many of you know Jason Fried. Many of you are clients of Basecamp, have been customers, have read his books. We had him as a keynote speaker in Chicago with us last fall. And we did this great conversation with cereal boxes. But I reached out to Jason and asked him, since he had written, one of his books was, again, co-authored, Remote Office Not Required, and he has kids under the age of 10, if he'd come and kind of kickstart a conversation for us here. So Jason, thank you for taking some time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Spend a few minutes sharing some context and then we'll just do Q&A. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see everybody again. Well, let's see, Basecamp, we've been working remotely for 20 years. So for us, working remotely is normal, but what is not normal is that half of our company has kids. About 56 people in the company, close to half have kids at home. Obviously, there's no school, there's no childcare, there's no help. So that's new for us and new for most people. I can also talk about remote work in general and what we've learned over 20 years. But right now, what we're all dealing with is something very similar, which is how do you work a full-time job and also be a full-time parent at the same time during the day? And the answer is you can't. That's what I think, at least. I think it's not possible. I think it's something has to give, and I think work has to give. So I think it's important for owners, leaders, managers, team leads, whatever, to create some space for their employees and be very understanding right now. And let them know that we understand that you probably can't put in full-time work right now. We're going to pay you still, as you always have been paid normal full-time salary, but maybe you can only put in 6 hours a day right now, or 5 hours, or whatever it is. Like, you find what works for you and we'll work around that. And that's kind of what we've done at Basecamp and what we've told all of our employees. And I was going to paste in in the chat, this is actually let me actually paste this in. I just pasted in a tweet with a picture of an announcement we put in and announced our whole company, and also this link here, the second link, you can read the text if you can't read the other one. But this is the announcement we made internally to everybody, saying, look, we know this is hard, it's kind of impossible actually. It's not just hard, it's impossible, literally. So everyone's got to find the right balance. I think this is I think leadership has to—
I'm sharing the screen now where,
Yeah, and if you click that second link, I know this image is probably hard to read. If you click the second link, actually that's the actual text I sent in the chat there. I put the second link in there. Yeah, so anyway, point is that I think it's important for companies to create some space for employees right now, to be reasonable, to be understanding, and to slow down. The company needs to slow down a little bit. Companies need to slow down. Not, of course, if you're making masks and ventilators and that kind of stuff, of course. But like for most of us, we're not doing those things. And we can chill out a bit. We can dial back our ambition a little bit and be reasonable about the next few months, which are going to be a slower set of months. People are going to be less available. You can't expect the same thing out of people that you might have expected 3 months ago. It's just, that's not the reality we're in. So I think it's very important for owners and people in positions of power to recognize that. So that's something we were very quick to do internally, because there's a ton of anxiety floating around inside companies right now. Like, how am I supposed to make this work? Am I going to get fired if I only have 6 hours a day now? Like, no, the answer in our world, the answer is no, of course not. But people need to know that, and they need to hear that from leadership. So
Yeah.
that's something that I think is very important right now. And a lot of people on the call are in positions of power.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to make sure people feel comfortable with the understanding that you recognize that they may not be able to be all that they normally are right now because they have other obligations at home, and they simply have to deal with those too.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it's, I can also start to hear people saying, well, holy moly, I mean, we have roundtables, Jason, running right now. We have one roundtable for companies that are collapsing, like 80, 90% down in revenues, retail, travel, some of these businesses. We have another roundtable for people who are in companies that are booming, because there's a certain number of companies that are actually growing right now. But what I find is true about both of those groups is that they actually feel like, they have to work even longer than what they were doing before because things are moving so fast. So
Yeah.
a few people talked about that they can slow down, and they're finding that, but I think most of them don't feel like they can.
Well,
So,
I hear that. I think this is naturally a reaction that people have, which is like things aren't going well right now. So like we need to work harder and longer. But the thing is that there's also reality to deal with here, which is like your people can't work harder and longer and also be full-time parents at home. You can't expect them to put in more time. They simply don't have more time. And the more time that they might be able to carve out is going to be stressed out time and anxious time and barely their time. I think what's a better angle here actually is to actually curb your ambitions a bit and figure out just how to stay in business, obviously. And that begins with costs. It doesn't really necessarily begin with working harder. It begins with costs and cutting out things and finding time that you normally are wasting. So if you need to if you think people need to work longer, cut out some things that they're doing during the day and reclaim that time. Don't try to steal more time from them, from their family, because that's just not going to work right now. So for example, if you have a daily meeting every morning at 9 to 10 to go around the room and talk about what you plan on doing today, don't do that. Give everybody that hour back and write it up instead. Have people write up things instead. There's lots of ways you can take advantage of this moment to reflect on the way you work and not do the things you used to do to actually free up more time. Yeah. Something I think that's really important here is that one thing that goes wrong when people begin to work remotely is they try to simulate the office. So if you have meetings all day long at the office, well, let's have the same thing just via Zoom or Skype or whatever. Like, no, the opportunity here is to have fewer meetings. It's not to try to recreate what you have in the office. It's to work differently. It's to give people more time to themselves. It's to write things up more than speak things out loud. It's to call fewer meetings and have fewer meetings and have fewer people involved in those meetings and give people more space and more time. And before you know it, you'll reclaim 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a week. And you don't need to ask people to work longer. You just need to cut out the things you don't really need to do. And that's hard, but it's all hard right now. And I think that's the better approach, actually. I think it's the healthier, more sustainable approach. And by the time people come out of this, it might be a few months down the road, they're going to feel better. They're going to feel more rested. They're going to feel better about the company they work for. They're going to feel better about their boss. If those people and those people in positions of power were thoughtful and respected their reality right now, then if they're pushed extra hard for the next 3 months and they're destroying people's marriages at home and destroying people's relationship with their kids at home, and then after that, they're expected to return back to normal, they're going to remember what those last 3 months were like, and you're not going to come back to normal the same way. So you have to think about this in the long term and not just the short term.
Yeah, yeah. We have one question in the chat, and then there's some people I'm going to bring in who have some various things to share and questions. But Nick is asking, how do you adjust or challenge employees whose jobs truly require a full 8-hour day, like call center support, being on the phones, that kind of thing?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Don't have as much flexibility to work fewer hours.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, again, the answer is first, reality comes first. So if someone cannot give you 8 hours right now because they have 2 or 3 hours they have to put in with their kids during the day, that's just reality. Like, you can't make them work 8 hours a day right now. It's just, they don't have the time. So what you do is you say, okay, well, maybe our call center is going to be a little bit slower. Maybe instead of answering the phones in 3 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute, it's going to be 6 minutes. Maybe instead of getting back to people via email in 15 minutes like we normally do, it's going to be 22 minutes. Like, we're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to work on our schedules and stagger things a bit better, because there will be some people who don't have the same pressures at home. And maybe they're the ones who can step up now, and then they can take some additional time off later. Like, you got to be creative about how to do this, but also the idea that everything has to be the same outwardly, I think is the mistake. That you have to think like, well, people have to work 8 hours a day because we have a call center. Well, yeah, you have a call center, but maybe you don't have to answer quite as many calls as quickly. Maybe you can slow things down a little bit. And I know people go, we can't slow things down. Well, you may have to. Like, you may have to do some of these things. And what you're going to find is, I think one of the most wonderful legacies of this moment is people are going to realize that high fidelity doesn't matter that much. Most things don't matter that much. And the things that you think matter so much maybe don't. So for example, I was on CNBC a couple days ago, live TV, and the anchor was in his house, in his bedroom, because that's where he works. And you know what? It was fine. The interview was fine. 6 months ago, they would have forced me to go down to the NBC Tower here in Chicago and go to a studio and do an interview. And they had to man that interview, and there had to be a producer there, and like all this expense and all this cost and all this stuff just to get it just right. And the truth is, it doesn't really matter that much. So a lot of things that we think we're holding on to that we must do the same exact way we did before, if we have to relax those standards for a bit, it's actually going to be, I think, a revelation that a lot of those standards didn't matter that much. So for example, at Basecamp, we typically answer customer service emails within 10 minutes or so. Right now we're running 20 minutes or so. It's taking twice as long, but it's fine. It's fine. Most companies don't even get back to you via email at all. So like, we're a little bit slower, but still faster than the industry, but we're able to just relax people's expectations a little bit, and everything's going to be fine. So I think that's, again, there are examples we can find where things have to, like truly, literally have to, like if you're working a hospital, you're a nurse, you're like yes. Yeah. But it's also a good moment for everyone to realize that like a lot of things we do are not critical things. Making software is not a critical job. I mean, like we make a very important product, but not really, all things considered. It's not a life or death thing. And a lot of things we think are really important, they are, but they're not as important as we may have thought before. So some things have to slide a little bit to make reality work. I think that's truly the only realistic way forward here. You can't will things to be the same. They're not the same. They're not the same for the next few months. Everyone knows that.
So let me share a couple of questions, and then just want to give a heads up to Kathy Roth that I'm going to bring you into the discussion in a moment to show your Kanban system for your 8-year-old child, which we're all eager to see. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But we have some members from companies like Target and others that so first of all, to the point, so Target has Target and Trader Joe's, and I think actually other stores that are open have reduced their hours so they can replenish more completely. Maybe that's a metaphor we can take in our personal work lives. One of our members said, how can you help high achievers and super productive people to release their own expectations about themselves and what they must do? And then there's actually a second part to this, Jason, which is connected, because another member said, how would you advise individual contributors that they have leaders that actually support the flexibility you're talking about, but their own fear of missing out or imposter syndrome is driving them like to be afraid that they'll fall behind their peers if they don't, if they don't overdo it, so to speak.
Yeah, I think the Trader Joe and Target example are good ones, first of all, to begin with. So those are nice examples of just like, they're making adjustments. They're making adjustments, and they're doing what they have to do. And look, we are the most adaptable species on the planet. We should be able to handle this.
It is indeed key to our success over the last.
Yeah, I mean, we can handle this. Like, if people work 7 hours instead of 8 hours, like the world's not going to fall apart. Like, we can handle this. It's going to be fine. I think that's the first thing, and that ties back to all these other things, which is it's going to be fine. But it's important for high achievers and people who are afraid of missing out on things. Like, this is actually a leadership question at the highest levels of an organization, to set the tone and to be clear about the expectations. A lot of people who are high achievers because they think they're expected to be high achievers. they think they're expected to do certain things by someone else in the organization. Some people, of course, are very, very self-driven, obviously, but a lot of people are doing things for the benefit or the behest of somebody else. And I think it's important for anyone who is in charge of other people or who other people report to remind those other people that my expectations right now are of trying to be sustainable, we're going to dial back our ambitions a little bit. For example, we've been, for a year and a half.
You had a new product.
Yeah, for a year and a half, we've been working on a new product that we're supposed to launch in April. We just said we're not going to launch it in April anymore. Not because it's not done, but because it's the wrong time to launch a product in pandemic times, first of all. Second of all, like, I don't want to create additional anxiety for people right now. And product launches are full of anxiety no matter what, no matter how prepared you are. So we're just like, we're going to wait until until May or until June or until things cool down. It's fine. It's all going to be fine. And that came from the top, and that helps to dissipate a lot of the pressure down below. Yeah. So it's,
well,
I just think it's very important.
Something.
Yeah.
One of our CEO members wrote here in the chat that we've allowed our team members with kids to set their own schedules, and where they are only available 40 to 50%, especially when both parents work, we've asked them to just try different methods to be available. I found that when they choose to work half days, to be hugely inefficient. I'm just reading this for the rest of the team. Whereas when they are on for a couple hours, then off for a couple hours, things move better through the company. But that seems likely to burn them out, as mind switching can be exhausting. Any practical recommendations for breaking up the day to, support them with kids, but get the best from them at the same time?
Yeah, here's what I've done. So I have two kids. 5.5 and 1.5, very needy at the moment. I work 2 hours on. So my wife's at home. She doesn't work. But we usually have someone who helps, and that person who helps is not around. So I work 2 hours. I take an hour off to help the kids, and I relieve my wife. So it's not just like I help out. I actually take the kids, and she can take a break. And then I go back and I work for 2 hours, and I take another hour, and she can take a break. And we kind of do that throughout the day. So I'm working basically in these 2 hour chunks right now with an hour break in between. And that's what works for us, for me, and for our family. Like, that's what we figured out works pretty well for us. There's other people in our company who figure out other things. And our whole thing was like, figure out whatever works for you, and whatever works for you works for us as a company. So there's other people who are basically starting work late. They're starting work at 11. And they're putting in like a 6 hour day, and they're working like 4 hours, and they take a couple hours for dinner and putting the kids to bed, then putting another 2 hours in later in the day. And they're coordinating with their own team to make sure that works for their own team of 2 or 3 or 4 different people. So there's no one size fits all here. The point is, what is the one size is the reduction of expectations on people and encouraging people to find what works for them and for their team. And just communicating very clearly, this is the best I can do right now. I'm going to do my best while I'm here, but this is the best that I can do. Yeah. Different jobs require different things, but I don't see any other way around this than to be very human about it and go, everyone's got to find their own way. They've got to communicate with their teams. They got to do the best they can. And that's just where we are right now. So for me, that's what I've found. 2, 1 off, 2, 1 off, 2, 1 off, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll talk more about this. And Kathy, I'm about to introduce you. I'll just say that, one of the wonderful silver linings of this moment is the ability for all of us to just be more human and not have it perfect. Even today with the webinar, like, there's a whole group of people that I gave the wrong link to, and they're like, how do we get on here? So, I'm texting with them, and we also, the polling thing got screwed up, but, we're running real time here. We only set this thing up a couple of days ago. And I find that people are really forgiving, actually, and they understand we're all dealing with this. Kathy, so Kathy Rott ran UX at Macy's, and Macy's, as you may know, has just laid almost everybody off, including Kathy, I'm sorry to say. But Kathy has a full-time job now, which is looking for a job. So by the way, if anyone on the phone wants to hire a great head of UX, Kathy's available. Yes. But Kathy, you were going to show us so you have an 8-year-old daughter. Yes. And you have a Kanban system that you're using.
Yeah, and there's a link that we can send out that is not my original idea, but this is just to help her have some agency in her day. And it's worked quite well, because I think if I've seen a lot of posts about people saying, you know, do reading from 9 to 9:30 and blah, blah, blah. And just having a set schedule, I think, doesn't really work for her. So this is the Kanban board. I'm just trying to pivot my laptop over here. Let's see. So this is her parking lot, her today. So we've got, you know, 2 snacks, a lunch. We've got mommy time, drawing with Mo Willems. And then this is her doing column. And then when she gets done, she gets free time. So there's her incentive. So we're trying to stack up about 5 hours.
Oh, we lost your audio, Kathy.
That was my thumb.
There you go.
So we also have time for a health activity and a chore activity. So, you know, it's working pretty well. You know, it's going sideways every couple hours, but, you know, I mean, it's sort of the best I can do. And, you know, I think it's a really good system, actually. And I need to do it for myself, I think.
Excellent. Well,
That's
Kathy,
cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jason. Yeah.
I love that. You know, I'm gonna borrow that one, because we've been kind of doing sort of the set schedule thing, and like it kind of works for us, but I can tell it's already falling apart. Like a week, 2 weeks in here, like it was novel for a moment, and now it's not. So I like this idea of you've got this collection of things you can do. Just move them along the chain or whatever, or the columns, and when you're done, you put them over. That's cool. I like that. Smart.
Thank you.
And we're doing the drawing thing with Williams as well. It's super fun.
Yeah.
Great. All right, Kathy, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to bring in a couple other members. Elizabeth Hartz, I'd like you to come join us for a moment. Let's see. How do I do that? Allow to talk. Let's see, more. Promote to panelists. That's what I want to do. Okay. And unmute. Okay. Elizabeth, are you there? She might not have realized I was going to call on her.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. Do we get a video, or are you not in a video?
I am. I don't know why it's not.
Oh, there we go. Great.
Good.
Yeah. So I just want, so Jason, Elizabeth is the CEO of Sitter City. And so obviously, and has actually been doing some great stuff. They just partnered with the city of Chicago to provide daycare services for, you know, first responders and frontline workers, and the hospitals and you know, the fire trucks and the medics and so on, which is awesome. But Elizabeth, you for both your employees and the families that you guys work with, you've learned a few things about this. I thought you could just share some thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, Jason, thank you for taking the time to do this, and a number of things that Jason said and Kathy said, we're hearing from the millions of families that use our platform. I think first and foremost, which Jason spent a lot of time on, is just, you know, people are not working from home, right? They're at home in a crisis trying to work. And so just really having compassion for people, which you've all three of you have been talking about, I think is the most important place to start. I would say, you know, some of the tips that we're hearing a lot are more about just like managing at home. And we have heard over and over again that like a routine is much more important than a schedule, which both Jason and Kathy got to, right? So that kids thrive on routine and make sure that the buckets are tackled. But you know, the whole family will go kind of crazy if everybody's trying to do gym class at 8:32 every day. It's just a bit unreasonable. We've also really seen that kind of starting and ending the day with your children in the same way, generally with communicating. So maybe breakfast all together or a quick walk in the neighborhood, depending on your situation. And in that time, just letting everybody talk about what's most important that day. And they may have brought it up at the closing of yesterday too, similarly dinner or a walk or something, where they could say, I have a test tomorrow from 10 to 10:45. Is it possible that everybody in the apartment is sort of out of this part of the apartment so I can take that test during this time, or mommy has a media interview with Chicago, NBC, can you not be loud by mommy's office at that time, and just giving everybody in the family time to, voice their needs. So that's really important. We've also found a lot of parents using nonverbal cues to make this a little bit fun, and the kids can do it too. So maybe your son hangs up a superhero cape when he wants some alone time, or, daddy puts a golf club outside his office when he's on a video conference with Phil and doesn't really want you running through. But, there are clever ways to create sort of space and signals, which I thought was interesting.
Have you thought about that, Jason? Nonverbal cues like that, the capes and the golf clubs?
Yeah, we haven't done that. I'm fortunate in that we have like a dedicated office room in our house I'm always working at home. So it's kind of ingrained in the family now, basically. But I do know, I've heard a lot of people talk about putting something on the doorknob, or just shutting the door when normally the door is open. Like if the door is shut, that means X, Y, Z, that kind of thing. But I do think it's important to have that understanding, because it is frustrating for everybody. If you're doing a media interview and you can hear the kids yelling, you start to feel anxiety because, that's natural. And then you're not on your game either. And then it kind of devolves pretty quickly. So I think it is important to set those expectations for everybody.
I think it's so unrealistic, right? That kids can chill for 8 whole hours or whatever, totally. Even if you have a stay-at-home parent. So if there are ways to show that there's certain times that you really are locked away or need privacy, I think is important. And then both Jason and Kathy mentioned the digital tools, like Mo Willems does this, art time, and there's a science mom who you can hang out with, and she does really fun, simple with stuff around the house science projects. So of course at Sitter City, we talk about hiring a babysitter that you use through FaceTime or Hangout or Zoom. Little kids under 4, that's hard, but
you've got virtual babysitting now.
Exactly, because even an hour where you're either your regular babysitter or you hire somebody new, it doesn't matter if you're in Chicago and they're in California now, but they can, help a little bit with schoolwork and just be another face. And I would just conclude by saying, the way you think about diversity and inclusion in the office, I think it's just really, really important everybody remembers that through this phase too, because you may be in East Hampton with college age kids upstairs doing their thing, but some of your employees are in crowded apartments with very little, they're really hanging on by a thread. And so just really having that lens of diversity and inclusion, and it goes all the way around, right? And just keeping all your employees aware of that.
Yeah.
But thanks for this, Jason, super helpful.
Well, thanks. Your comments are wonderful. And by the way, that last point is really important. I think when we think we're working from home, like sometimes it's easy to assume everyone has a home, but everyone's home's different. Like I've got some friends in New York who have 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. Like that's not, like, I can't even imagine what that's like right now. So even though I have my own office room in our house, like that's just, you can't, it's easy to expect other people have that. Like, oh, just go to a quiet place. Just go find a quiet place. Like, well, a lot of people don't have a quiet place at home at all right now. Some people have to use a closet, or a little small room under the stairs if they even have that, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's really important to think about right now.
Yeah.
Especially for leadership who typically, they might have nicer things, they might have more space. And it's easy to assume everyone's going to have what you have, but most people may not. So I think that is a really great point.
So we have
and with children and without children, right, totally. Phil? Because I think a lot of moms and dads are watching, people who don't have kids, like organizing their closets beautifully or learning how to speak Italian during this time, and many parents are like literally just trying not to have a nervous breakdown, and that dichotomy in your employee base, it's we just have to be mindful.
Yeah. you know, we have a couple members. So one member company, when they, you know, went to work from home, they discovered that 2 of their employees were homeless, right? And like, that was like, okay, wow, how did we not know that? And what are we going to do there? We also, the CIO for the city of San Antonio is a member, and, you know, like, what does it mean to have the city workforce, with the exception of the police department, fire department, and so on, work from home, and people are in very radically different situations. Some don't have Wi-Fi at home. You know, this is something that's also happening in New York, where there's 100 or 200,000 at least kids who have no Wi-Fi at home, so they can't do the learning, right? So I appreciate what you're saying, Elizabeth. I think it's really important.
There's also, like, it's easy to assume parents mean there's 2 single parents, right, too. I mean, like right now, I'm like, I'm trading off with my wife, but like, that's, what if I didn't have that, or she didn't have that, or like, well, then what do you do? You know,
yeah,
there's all sorts of different levels of complexity here.
This cartoon behind me, by the way, that she's a single mom. If you guys can see that, and she's a single mom in New York and a reporter. And so, you know, it's just her and her kid, and, you know, on the laptop in the bunk bed, you know, and her 7-year-old doesn't, you know, wants to be near her all day long. It's a pretty challenging situation. All right, let's keep going. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's great to see you. And thank you for what you're doing with the first responders. So more questions. So another, and by the way, someone put in the chat, hey, what about single parents? So obviously we started to address that. But so some of our companies are trying to think about, Jason, like, okay, you know, how do we set expectations about how to operate? Especially like some of their employees are asking, are we going to work differently? Are we using Slack in a new way to show when we're here or away, for example, or ideas for team building when you're remote, and how and when do we accessible? Do you kind of operationalize that stuff at Basecamp?
Yeah, I mean, I have some pretty strong opinions about this, so I'll try to hold back a little bit. First off, you don't want to work the same way. Like, again, this idea that you want to try to simulate the way you've always done things, but just do them remotely, I think is a mistake, and it's a missed opportunity, really. What you have now is an opportunity to reflect on how you work and to think about working a different way, to actually allow people to have more time to themselves during the day, to allow people to be a bit more productive and with less time, to have fewer meetings, to have fewer people involved in things. Like, if you think about it this way, a lot of companies, they go into a conference room to have a meeting and there's 10 chairs around the table. So you fill the 10 chairs with 10 people, because it'd be weird to have 3 people in a room with 10 chairs. So you fill up the room. That's kind of what you do. And so naturally, if they have to have a meeting and they want to do it on, with video conferencing on Zoom or something, well, they're going to call those 10 people in because that's what they're used to doing. But maybe those 10 people don't need to be in that meeting. Maybe it's just 3 people would be fine. Maybe you don't need to have the meeting at all, which is my argument most of the time, which is write it up instead and disseminate the information and let people think about things before they respond. Meetings are real-time events that require people to come off the top of their head with feedback. And oftentimes feedback's much better when it's well considered and thought through and slept on. So this idea that, like, we need to continue to make everything real time, just far away, I think is a big mistake and a missed opportunity. And it's actually much harder to do it that way. So I would encourage people to cut back on the amount of meetings they have, to cut back on the number of video conferences they think they have, to cut back on the number of people involved in everything that you're doing, and instead give people more time to themselves to do the work they need to do on their own schedule and their own time. So I would not be like, group chat is a people rush to group chat right now because they feel like we need to communicate all the time. That's like a mistake. What ends up happening is you create more and more chaos that way, where there's more and more people paying more and more attention to more and more real-time conversations all the time. And now there's this fear of missing out that you're building in that you didn't have before, because now there's more conversations going on and more red dots you've got to knock off. And it's like, it's too much. I think people need to get a bit more asynchronous. The beauty of remote work is the asynchronous abilities of remote work. Writing something up, posting it in long form, letting people consider it, think about it, getting back to you tomorrow or 3 hours from now, whenever it is, not immediately. This expectation of immediate response spells chaos. And it's especially hard when people are transitioning, more like scrambling into remote work. So I really think it's important to slow down, to let people be considerate, to write things up in long form, and not force everything into real time. This is a chance to go asynchronous and find the real pleasures and the real performance improvements that come with that. This is that moment, so you can build this organizational resiliency. There's now a new way to do things. So when you go back to maybe working in the office, you're going to have another way to work versus just the same way you tried to simulate remotely. So anyway, I can go into more and more detail on that if people have specific questions, but the most enlightened companies that are going to come out of this are the ones that figure out a better way to work. Not the same way to work remotely, but a better way, realizing the advantages of remote work and then bringing some of those lessons back. So instead of trying to simulate the office, you're actually going to want to try to simulate what you were able to achieve remotely when you come back to the office. So that's the real advantage here and the real opportunity.
Great, thank you. So I have a question for the audience, because one of our members here has posted that they'd love to hear about how people are handling children with special needs, or IEPs. So I'd like to know if there are other parents on the call today who do have children with special needs, who can speak to that. So put that in the chat. Okay, Kathy Rott does. All right. So Kathy, why don't we bring you back in again, since we knew that we know that worked the first time, and see if you can talk just a moment about that. Just takes a moment. And there you are.
Back. I can't say that I'm managing that all that well, honestly, because I'm no expert in what's going on for my child. And, that's part of why we have the IEP is so that she can have the expertise she needs. I do know that we're in San Francisco, so the district, I think, is going to be putting some programs into place, hopefully starting next week, where they will have some one-on-one time on VC with their normal teachers that they work with. But I honestly don't have a good solution for that, other than she, needs a lot of time with me. And so, that just goes to the conversation we've been having.
And obviously you're using the Kanban thing with her,
Yeah.
and not coping. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. I mean, look, I think that's right. There are no silver bullets for some of these things, obviously.
We're not educators, so it's, I have trouble breaking down simple math in a way that she can understand. So it's.
Well, I think one of the silver linings of this period is the respect for teachers is going way up. We were like, holy moly.
Oh, that's the truth. Yeah. And I really value our teacher. She had a one-on-one with my daughter the other day, which was just lovely.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let's keep going. Well, thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
I want to bring in, let's see. Let me read from a question here that came in before that I thought was good to look at. So learning to be the juggler at home during the workday, no matter how much prep they do by creating a daily calendar in the kitchen for the kids on what they should be doing each hour. And again, I think this goes to some of what we were talking about in terms of like not necessarily selecting the hour, but using a Kanban or using, sort of here are the things to do today. And when you're done, you get free time. But the biggest problem, so the calendar isn't working, and he still gets a lot of on-call interruptions for being the home IT guy when the kids get kicked out of their streams or can't access critical files, or the crappy laptop's battery dies, or they drop the Wi-Fi. And he's like, the homeschooling on-call support staff, essentially, not to mention answering Common Core math questions real time. And he's finding it challenging. There's some silver linings, which is he's spending more time with the family, of course, and the quality time together, but was hoping to hear some tips on how to handle this, juggling all these things at once.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, as you mentioned, there's no silver bullet here. This is just life. And like, this is my point originally, which is that companies can imagine ideal situations all day long. But the reality is we're interrupted with kids and other things that go on, and we have to stop doing what we're doing because the kid's screaming outside, and you can't just be like, well, wait 15 minutes. Like that they don't understand. I mean, a 5-year-old doesn't understand that really. So you just got to do what you got to do. But one thing we've done is we've because we have had some internet actual issues here at my house. Our internet went out for a couple days, and that was really frustrating because we've been sort of relying on some live. There's this in Chicago. There's this guy named Mr. Dave who's like a kids music guy, and he's got some great classes. Now he's doing them online, and it's super fun, but they're live. And when our internet went out, like my son was really looking forward to doing the Mr. Dave thing, but we couldn't because the internet was dead. So what we just did was like, we said Mr. Jason instead, me. So like we just went downstairs and played with some instruments that we had sitting around and like just kind of simulated that.
Yeah.
And I had to take an hour away from work to do that, but like what choice do I have? I have to do that, you know, and that's the situation. So I'll make up that time another time, or I won't make it up. But like you kind of have to improvise as best you can and just deal. You just got to deal, recognize like you are not in control right now. We all love to think we're in control of everything all the time. That's what humans want to be.
Epictetus.
Yeah, there you go. We are not in control of basically hardly anything right now, except of course our reaction to things. And when the kid's screaming and the internet goes down, like you can curse all you want to yourself or out loud or whatever you might do, but it doesn't really matter. You've got to deal with the situation and just be adaptable and adjust, and also recognize, hopefully, that again, if you're in a position of power, recognizing that your team, your people, they're going to have to do the same thing too. And so being very forgiving and very accommodating and very understanding, I think is just super important. So yeah, I don't have any other tips other than like, if someone's really looking forward to something that can't happen, like simulate it as best you can, or double it up later or something like that. That's that's my suggestion. There's 50 people here who probably have better ones, but that's what we've tried to do.
Yeah. And people are commenting in the chat about how IT parenting burden is just a real thing. It's, you know, you're the help desk and the tech center.
What are you going to do?
One of the questions that came in is, what about the mental game? Easy for relationships to fall apart over written communication and distance. And in particular, one of the things I'm hearing a lot is, you know, so you guys are fully remote. We're fully remote and have been for a long time. So we've learned how to build relationships this way. But, you know, a lot of stuff is happening over like Slack or email. And of course, that loses a lot of context and people are getting reactive to each other and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what tips do you have?
Well, I mean, I come at it from a different point of view, which I think writing is wonderful. And for most people, actually, ultimately a better way to communicate because it's considered. Not Slack. Slack's bad because Slack means you got to respond instantly to everybody and you're thinking one line at a time and it's chaotic. I'm talking about considered writing. I'm talking about thinking something through and presenting it as a complete thought.
Yeah.
And taking time to absorb what someone else wrote and ask some questions about it if you weren't clear and clarifying those things. Now, not everyone's a great writer, but this is, again, is an opportunity to become a better one.
Right.
A lot of people are terrible communicators in person, horrible. They're on the spot all the time. They're in a meeting, they're sitting in a room, they're asked their feedback, and what they say is not actually what they believe, but they say because there's all this pressure and all these eyeballs looking at them. So we can't assume that just because people are in person, they're better communicators. In many cases, that puts people on the spot and they're very uncomfortable that way. So there's a lot of people who have to fake good communication, fake what they really, really believe. So my point is that communication is not necessarily about being in person or writing. It's more fundamental than that. It's being clear in whatever situation you have. It's taking time to think something through if you're not sure and saying, I'm not sure right now. It's like those are the things that really matter. And the other thing I would say is that take the time right now to be as clear as you can and preempt questions that you think might come up, to shorten the length of, like, what gets frustrating in writing is if you write something down and someone doesn't understand, they take it the wrong way, and then you have to kind of clarify and go back and forth. And then it turns into this little bit of a shouting match, like all that kind of stuff can happen. So I think it's really important to clarify and to think things through and to think about what other people might want to know about when you're going to say something, and say that ahead of time. So that's something we found that works really well. But I just don't simply buy the fundamental notion that writing is less personal. I mean,
Yeah.
we all read wonderful books. We all hear wonderful stories. Like writing is incredibly expressive in a wonderful, wonderful medium. It's just that if we're not practiced in it, we assume that it's worse, but it's not worse. It's just different. You just have to practice it just like anything else. And again, the expectation should be that people need some time to find their legs here. Like if I threw a guitar in your arms and you never played guitar before, I would never expect you to be good at that. I wouldn't think that because you played it poorly that it's a bad instrument. I would just think you're just not used to that. And so the same thing is true for writing. I think you have to give some people some time to figure out how to do this. But in the end, they're going to have a new skill and a new way to communicate, which is going to save a lot of people a lot of time. And they're actually going to level up their abilities here. So I look at that as the opportunity here and not the negative.
Yeah. I like that reframe. And I'll tell you that certainly anytime there's some tension in anything I've sent to someone on email, it's because I wrote it too fast. And, I didn't, because it usually when I send emails, it takes me 2 or 3 looks to think about what I really want to say. And I'm drafting and editing to get the voice and tone right. And if I don't do that, half the time it'll cause a bad reaction.
Can I add something to this too? This is more of a tactical thing. At Basecamp, we write everything up first in long form. Like every idea we want to share with each other, we pitch it in long form. We're always writing things up in a way where we put them in Basecamp and people can think about them and respond later. Now, sometimes there's conversations that go back and forth over a matter of a couple days or even a few hours where we realize we get to the point where we need to level up the interaction. And that's when we'll reach for a video conference. So we don't reach for video conference first. If you reach for video conference first, you end up talking about things for an hour. That's just what ends up happening. And oftentimes you don't need to do that. So you hopefully can explain things in writing first, then you're also documenting it for future generations of your company so people can look back on those conversations and understand why decisions were made. But there comes a point sometimes where you need to get higher fidelity, and that's when you can level up the conversation to a quick video chat or something like that. So we tend to start that way. We start by writing and then we level up versus automatically default go into meeting mode where we're just pulling people into meetings. Because look, everyone who's on this call right now, you're basically only really kind of able to do one thing at a time, which is watch this call or listen in, or maybe you're doing some other things too, but you're not able to do 2 things at once at 100%. And so the cost of pulling someone into a meeting to discuss something is that you've taken them off their other work. And you're basically saying, whatever I want to talk about right now is more important than what you were doing. But if you write something up instead and you disseminate that information, people can get to it when they have a free break in their day, and they can pick up that information and read it in a few minutes versus waiting an hour to have to hear it all. And it's a much better use of people's time. And people are going to find all of a sudden they have an extra 2 or 3 hours a day available when they don't have video conferences going on all day long about things that didn't need to be actually discussed in this sort of manner.
Yeah, cool. All right, we have a couple more minutes left, and I want to say a few things. One is you heard Jason and I briefly reference a Greek Stoic named Epictetus. Stoic philosophy is something that is actually particularly relevant and powerful right now. And some of you know, I run a small nonprofit called the Reading Odyssey, where we'll read important texts of history or philosophy and bring in scholars to answer questions and so on. And we're going to be doing a reading of Seneca, who was a Roman Stoic, starting in mid-April. So I'll include this in the follow-up email, but if any of you want to participate, it's actually free. And we do it. We've been doing this for years, and we meet once a month over Zoom, and prior to that over phone calls. So it's always been a virtual thing, and it's worked really well. The second thing I'll say is we have one of our CEO council members runs a company called Energage, which is an employee experience company. They do about 2 million surveys across 8,000 companies, and he has graciously offered, and you'll get this in email, if any one of you want them to run a survey on how your employees are doing during COVID-19 and working from home and with the kids and so on, they're going to do that for you for free, and you're not going to get placed into their marketing system. This is important to me. Anytime we do something like this with a member company, it has to be that there's not going to be follow-up marketing. Now, if any of you take the thing and you want to talk to them more, you're free to do that. But this is truly a free thing, and it's not going to go into the marketing thing. And we'll send the email, but their team has graciously agreed to work on that, and I really appreciate that. We have a few more questions. I think, you know, we haven't talked about older children, and one of the attendees today brought up a really important point, which is older children are they're learning life lessons and watching us adapt, but they're also, this is bringing up a lot of anxiety. I have a number of nieces and nephews who are seniors in high school and are really worrying about, will they be able to go to college in the fall? Will their colleges open? How's that going to work? You know, and they're also seeing, you know, the anxiety about the economy and jobs, not to mention the disease itself. So I'd love to see if there are anybody in the chat, if you've learned something about older children and managing their anxiety. And I don't know if that's come up in your company, Jason, and how you guys have handled that.
That most of the people at Basecamp have younger kids.
They have younger kids.
However, if I can quickly address the anxiety thing, because this actually did come up amongst the adults at the company, right? The people who work at Basecamp. So, you know, we do all of our work in Basecamp, and there's a ton of communication happening in Basecamp. And for a while, early on, during the early days of the pandemic, people were talking about COVID-19, like around the work talk. Like we were talking about work, and people were sharing links to articles about how many people are dying in Germany and Italy, and it was everywhere. And it was creating a lot of anxiety for people, because people are aware of it, but they don't want to see it. Some people don't want to see it all day. Other people love to pay attention to every possible news story and every additional number, and they want to know that stuff. But like, a lot of people were finding it really anxious just to even be at work, because everyone was talking about this disease. And so we created a separate place in Basecamp we call it Pandemic in Basecamp, whatever, it doesn't matter. But like, the only place you're allowed to talk about COVID-19 stuff is there. You cannot talk about it amongst the project work that you're doing. You cannot talk about it amongst your team. You can talk about it over there. And that keeps it compartmentalized, and it's seriously reduced anxiety across the company, because now people don't have to feel like they're just being like hit by it all day long through casual conversation.
I like that. And I could see some creative ways of saying there's a pandemic moment or space that as a family, we can talk about it, but we're going to agree not to for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
One of our attendees, Mark, said he's got college kids back at home, and they all have class and work time, but all the meals are together and with a rule of no phones during the meals. And then they have a board game or movie night as a family, as well as family jogging. He said the only challenge is household chores. Everybody's challenged, but how the heck do we keep our houses clean amongst everything else we're doing? But that's helpful, Mark. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Put them in the chat. We have a minute or two left. In the meantime, I'll look at stuff that people sent us. I mean, I really wonder what tips do we have for Maggie, who has a toddler. That was the one I referenced earlier, whose toddler crawls over to the dog bowl for kibble. You know, like, and I don't know Maggie's situation. She might be single mother. I'm not sure. Like, you know, again, I think the issue is, you know, there is no silver bullet. You're not going to be able to work the same kind of hours. You're going to have to think about your day in a different way. But what do you think, Jason?
Our 1.5-year-old, our daughter, she does the same thing. We have a cat though, so it's slightly different, but cat kibble instead. But I think the thing is like, kids are going to do what they're going to do. The hard part is you as a parent not overreacting and spazzing out and freaking out because you're already stretched thin. It's really on us. It's not on the kids to be different. The kids are going to be kids. They're always going to be kids. You can't stop your 1.5-year-old or 2-year-old from going over to the dog bowl. Like, you can't. I mean, you can put gates up. Kids are going to do what they're going to do. It's how you're going to react to that thing. So I think it's really on us to be professional parents in the moment, which is to understand the reality of the kids' worlds right now. Things are all crazy for them too. They don't have the capability or the capacity to change their behavior right now. It's all on us, and it's hard, and we suck at it. I suck at it. I shouldn't say we, I will say I suck at it right now. I'm trying to get better at this too. This is a hard moment for everybody, but it's really on us. You can't expect anything else different from your kids. So it's such a wonderful, again, I just look at the challenge here and the opportunity. It's a wonderful time to practice your reactions to things and recognizing that you can't control what your kid's going to do in these moments. And the only thing you can control is your reaction to that thing. And if you get heated and annoyed, it's actually going to make the situation a lot worse. It's not going to make it better.
So Mary, and I'll just jump in and say Mary Haken Lee, excuse me, just wrote that, you know, they have a very small space, but they baby proofed it. And that took away a lot of anxiety. So if she crawls out of sight, we don't have to worry right away what's happening. Someone else wrote, like, some kid got very, very sick from the kibble, right? So like, yeah, like you probably need to think about baby proofing if you can.
Yeah, if you're not able to maybe pay attention to the kid as frequently, and like, of course, you got to do all those basic things, but kids are going to get into all sorts of other things. They're going to find, when you block off this route, they're going to find a new route. They're water. They're just like water, right? They're going to find something. Right. So you can't, unless you're going to put them in a rubber room, you know, you just got to, kids are going to be kids, and it's on us to just go, yep, that just happened. Yeah. Okay. Because the other thing about kids is they absorb your emotions, they absorb your anxieties. They're very, very, very persistent, or very what word am I looking for? Perceptive, and they're going to pick up on your nervousness and your anxiety. So just, it's on us right now to be the best we can and do the best we can and recognize that we're not perfect. We're going to screw up all the time at work and at home, and now the same, or in both places at once. Yeah. That's life, and everyone's going through it right now.
Life during wartime, as the talking head said. Well, thank you, Jason. I really appreciate it. We're getting a lot of lovely comments. Look, you know, in part, it's just to know that we're all not insane. We're sharing the pain here. And there are no silver bullets, but there are some things we can do as leaders to think about how we create the context and the expectations. I think what I love about this moment, if I can say that, is the increased capacity to be more human and real with each other, and that more people are willing to do that than ever before.
Yeah, and that business doesn't have to be all business all the time. There's like this, people put on this business face, you know, it's like, oh, serious. Right. Yeah. Just people dealing with life. And we happen to be working together during the day on something, but like, we're all just people. It's all people. And I think you're right, Phil, that this is a moment where people are going to spot the humanity in a lot of people, and a lot of their coworkers that maybe they didn't know before. And also, as someone else mentioned, the people in our lives that we all rely on, childcare workers, teachers, cleaning crews, you know, all sorts of people that it's easy sort of you pay and you kind of just assume that everything's going to be taken care of, but then you realize when they're not around, like how important they really are. And I think we're all paying attention to that right now too. This is going to be good in the end. Of course, some people can get very sick, and that's not good, but like in the end, I think
we'll learn some things as a species.
We'll learn some things.
And I just want to say, you know, again, we'll send out the information about the Stoicism and also a link to Jason's book. And the survey, if you want to be part of that with that other company. But the one thing I want to say is, like, if you do have it, look, if you're a professional, and you likely are if you're on this call, and you do have someone who cleans your home regularly, you should, if you can financially, pay them while they're not coming, right? If you live in a city like New York and you live in an apartment building with doorman or concierge, you should give them a wartime tip. You know, usually you give them a tip at the end of the year. Give them another tip. They are like having to get on the subway and come to your building and help you if you have the privilege to live in an environment like that. And you know, and you should definitely do something to show thankfulness and gratitude to the teachers of your children, how much you've learned about how hard their jobs are. Because as a society, we don't respect that enough. And
speaking of that too, tips. Make sure you tip delivery drivers really well right now.
Oh, delivery drivers, absolutely.
Yeah, especially well. I've been hearing about a lot of people who are doing that aren't getting tips right now. I mean, these people are putting themselves at risk for you.
Yeah.
Take care of people if you can.
What you would normally give them, if you can afford that. Some people can't. I understand that.
Of course.
Yeah, this is only exacerbating income inequality right now, and each of us has a role to play in can't fix the whole thing, but you can do something. I mean, I also just I say thank you to people. I say thank you. If I'm walking down the street to a UPS driver who didn't come to my house, I say thank you for being out here. And they're like, what? Oh, no one's ever said that to me. Like, why not? We should all be saying that. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you, Jason.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Good luck to everyone.
Okay.
All
Take
right.
care.
See you
Bye-bye.
around.